Welcome to Lecture 6. Have you ever heard someone say something like, well, the police always blank, fill in the blank. Have you ever heard someone ask, will the police give me a ticket for, and then fill in the blank? These types of statements assume that the police, quote unquote, are a monolithic group that always thinks and acts the same in all circumstances. Thinking that way, one could argue that such statements are as uneducated or stupid as the following statements. Women always blank, African Americans never fill in the blank. What would an Asian do if I did blank? These statements would also see each group as monolithic, as not individuals, and as being controlled by their gender, their ethnicity, etc. So this week we examine the police subculture and other cultural influences on the attitudes and behaviors of police officers. A subculture, as defined in sociology, is usually a group within a larger culture that shares its own set of beliefs, attitudes, norms, and customs. In 1966, when we were first beginning to study the police and the criminal justice system, sociologist Jeremy Skolnick identified a police subculture. He described the characteristics of the subculture as cynicism and suspicion of outsiders, an authoritarian personality, so things are seen as black and white, I'm in charge, you do what I say, an us versus them mentality, so the police bond together against everyone else, code of silence, where they don't talk to outsiders and they don't rat each other out when they're doing bad things, and stereotypical attitudes towards minorities. Regardless of whether or not Skolnick's characteristics of the police subculture are even accurate, there has been tremendous disagreement about the way he describes the robotic influence of the subculture on police officer behavior. He basically describes it that the subculture dictates to police officers how they will think and how they will act. And in part of that, he's missing the point that maybe it's how the police officers think and they act creates the subculture, not the other way around. However, in the many years since Skolnick's work in 1966, the subfield of sociology of occupations has greatly expanded and revealed that most occupational and social groups of any type develop subcultures. This isn't something unique to the police. All social groups develop subcultures. For example, do you think there's a college student subculture? Remember what the definition is. Is there a group within the larger society that shares its own set of beliefs, attitudes, norms, or customs? So, is there a subculture within college students that, separate from the main dominant culture, they have their own little set of beliefs, attitudes, norms, and customs? So in other words, if you are a college student at the University of Toledo, would you have a lot of things in common with a college student from Bowling Green State University or from Ohio State University? Would you have common shared experiences, beliefs, understandings of things? The answer would definitely be yes. I mean, people who have not been to college wouldn't have the same experiences or understand the same things as college students have. So there is a college student subculture. Is there a factory worker subculture? Definitely. You can work at different types of factories, manufacturing different types of things, but workers across these different locations and different types of manufacturing generally share a number of shared experiences, shared perspectives on their work, etc. Is there an athlete subculture? You bet. Is there a retail subculture? Meaning, do you have things in common with people who work at other retail establishments? Experiences, troubles at work, dealing with customers, stuff like that. Yeah, it's very similar from retail to retail location, but people who haven't worked in retail wouldn't necessarily understand those situations or have those experiences. Same way with fast food. There's a fast food worker subculture. Have you ever been a part of any of these subcultures? Well, not necessarily all of them listed here, but I guarantee you, you've been part of subcultures. everyone's been part of probably multiple subcultures throughout their life. You share many of the same norms, attitudes, and insider terminology with other members of that subgroup. Now, thinking back to those experiences and those subcultures you were part of or are part of, did it control your behavior? Well, Skolnick argued that it did. Most of the more recent research is showing how that's a little ridiculous. They're not robots, automatons, doing what the subculture tells them to do. The subculture develops because of the shared experiences that they have, not the other way around. So, the first reading looks at a more up-to-date view of the police subculture and reevaluates it and realizes that there is a police subculture, but that it doesn't necessarily control the officer's behavior, and that there are 6 different facets within this police subculture that are sometimes conflicting. And which one of these facets will take precedence in controlling the officer's behavior or guiding the officer's behavior, is probably a better way to state that, differs from situation to situation. Then after reading Steve Herbert's article on the broader police subculture, we'll move to reading this article, Shedding Light on Police Subculture, an Examination of Officers' Occupational Attitudes, by Eugene Paolini. That's how you pronounce the name, Paolini. This article talks about within the broader police subculture, you've got lots of different subtypes of police personalities. So yeah, there's this overarching police subculture, but even within that, you got multiple different types of officer working personalities at work within any police organization. Next is the article Variation in Police Patrol Practices, the Precinct as a Sub-Organizational Level of Analysis by Kim Hassel. This is a really good article that breaks down, not only is there broad police subculture, and then individual officers have their different working personalities and perspectives, then within different precincts or different beats or different posts within a police organization, there are different cultures. And then lastly, Wilson Redo, another look at the varieties of police behavior by John Liederbach and Larry Travis. Larry Travis is one of my mentors, been a big influence on my academic career. And John Liederbach graduated from the University of Cincinnati just a couple years ahead of me. This article, what I want you to get out of this article more than their actual research study is the whole literature review part. They're testing a theory that was proposed by James Q. Wilson in a book from the 1960s called Varieties of Police Behavior. And the main crux of Wilson's book is that there are different cultures within different types of police departments. Some have a legalistic culture, some have a watchman-style culture. So each different police department has its own organizational culture and flavor and feel. So when you're even trying to predict how a particular police officer will act in a particular situation, you got to think of this hierarchy all working at the same time. There's the broader police subculture with 6 normative orders that each one of these normative orders take different precedents at different points in time. Then that's filtered by the police department's culture. The way people act on Ohio State Highway Patrol are generally different than how they act on Toledo Police Department, which is generally different than how police officers act on the small Swanton Police Department. Every single agency has its own different culture, and decisions are filtered through that culture. Then within the organization, there are different beats, different precincts. The same officer may act differently depending on the different precincts that officer may be working in. And then there's individual officer temperament. There are a number of different officer personality types. And so any officer behavior, if you're even trying to predict it, has to take into account all these different cultures operating at the same time. So, don't forget quiz number 6. If you run into any problems or have any questions, be sure and email me. And you should also be starting to work on writing assignment 2 by now. Remember, writing assignment 2 is you take examples from the readings from Module 2 and use them to try to support or provide support for the theory that you picked from Module 1, the theory explaining criminal justice agent behavior. There's more than enough examples in each one of these units from the readings, especially last week's and this week's. There should be tons of evidence that you can use to support whichever theory you've decided to select.